Today on the show with Beau, we talk about going from real estate to Bitcoin, going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, role models for building a business, the challenge of setting up a Bitcoin mining operation, developing a Bitcoin strategy, and living a full life through meditation and connectedness with others. This is a great episode. Make sure you watch right till the end. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Constructive Conversations. The intention of this podcast is to explore the mindset and actionable strategies that empower entrepreneurs to achieve success in all areas of life, while inspiring listeners to confidently pursue their own ambitious dreams. The reason I started this podcast is because 10 years ago, I knew I wanted to start a business, but I had no idea where to start and no role models to follow. So the goal is to provide that inspiration for new entrepreneurs and to provide fuel for those who are already doing it. Joining us today, we have Beau Turner. Beau is a Bitcoin miner and Bitcoin mining co-location host, the owner of Abundant Minds. Thanks so much for coming on today, Beau.
Thanks for having me, Nick. Really excited for this.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to speak with you. So let's start off with what you do today. Tell us about Abundant Minds and what does Abundant Minds do?
Absolutely. So Abundant Minds is a Bitcoin mining company. We mine Bitcoin ourselves, but what my passion is in this is opening that up to other investors and other entrepreneurs who want to get into something like Bitcoin mining, know that it's a potential for a great passive income stream, but they don't necessarily have all the technical know-how to set it up themselves. And it's really been a passion project, but also me scratching my own itch in a way, because I tried to get into it a few years ago and had a few rough experiences with people that didn't have the same pure intentions that I have for my clients. So really happy to own and operate 4 data centers at this point in Oregon. And we're contributing to lowering the cost of energy through these flexible load data centers, and it couldn't be more fun.
Awesome, that's really cool. So take us back to sort of when did you get introduced to Bitcoin and when did this whole journey start?
Yeah, so I was introduced to Bitcoin first in 2015 when I was a freshman in college and thought it was cool. Didn't really think that deeply into it other than, it definitely appealed to my libertarian sensibilities. At the time, Ethereum was kind of new on the scene as well, so I was looking at that. Put a few $1,000s in the space and then kind of forgot about it and woke up to quite a bit of money in 2017. Watched it all go down again in 2018 and then, took a couple years outside of the space. I was working on my engineering degree at the time, so was really more focused on that. And I went straight into real estate. So out of college, I started building a real estate company in Texas and totally ignored the space. And then 2020 really changed a lot about how I saw the world, how I saw the investment landscape. And so I took that opportunity to move from Texas to Oregon and really went way deep down the Bitcoin rabbit hole again. Fell in love with it again, not just as an investment, but something that I thought would reshape the way that we all look at the world. And mining really appealed to me as well because it was the physical tie, is the only part of the network that really interacts with the physical world and our energy systems. And, the one thing that I couldn't let go of as a real estate investor going into Bitcoin was cash flow. And Bitcoin doesn't give you any kind of cash flow on its own. So mining is that native and natural way within the Bitcoin ecosystem to actually get some sort of recurring income.
So you went from real estate to Bitcoin. Was that like a smooth transition? Did you say, okay, I'm going all in Bitcoin, I can see the cash flow opportunity with mining? What did that transition look like?
Yeah, I would love to say that it was perfectly charted out and planned out, but anybody that's listening that's an entrepreneur knows that it's much more about just taking what you've got and acting on what's in front of you. So it really just started with one property. I had a portfolio all across the southeastern US, and I just had one property to start with that I was no longer interested in keeping, and I rolled it into Bitcoin. And a couple months later, decided to take another one and roll it into a few miners. And, piece by piece, property by property, I realized that I was no longer interested in being a landlord. It didn't make me wake up with a sense of passion and purpose. And every extra hour, every little bit of energy and money that I spent in the Bitcoin space, I found myself enjoying my life a lot more and feeling like I was connected to something that was really important. So especially if your audience is entrepreneurs, sometimes you have no idea how something is going to work out, but following that sense of interest, that sense of intrigue and passion is often a key to working on something that's not only going to matter to you, but matter to the world around you.
Absolutely. definitely following that passion is a key. I think all entrepreneurs can understand. And tell us more about, the Bitcoin community and sort of, yeah, getting integrated with that community, like you said, and like finding the connection there. Yeah, maybe for people who haven't been exposed to the Bitcoiner community.
In my case, it was at first a very solitary thing. I mean, I was in college and I was that guy that wanted to talk about these weird crypto things, and I had a couple of people that were kind of that mindset and thought it was cool, but didn't really have a real diehard community around it. If you've been to networking meetups and other kind of local business meetups, those are often a place where you'll find like-minded individuals, and I think it's very worthwhile to connect with those people. And it's the same in the Bitcoin space. When I moved up to Bend, I didn't know anybody. I was in a new place with just me and my wife. And the first group of people that I really connected with, that I felt a sense of kinship with, were the local Bitcoin community. It's a group of about 15 to 30 people, depending on the week, that meet up on a monthly basis. And occasionally we'll go out and get drinks and hang out outside of those meetups. But it's a great way to find people who are like-minded. And you would know as well as I do, Bitcoin is definitely more than just this asset or a currency. It's really a kind of integrated way of looking at the world and seeing the context of the backdrop of everything that came to build the way that our economy works. So you find a lot of like-minded people with similar outlooks on history and the way that the world is going, and it's been quite fun.
And I like how you mentioned at the beginning, hearing about that appeal to your libertarian attitudes. Do you find that's like a common theme in the community, and you think that draws people into the community into Bitcoin, or does Bitcoin then also influence people, to have more of that outlook?
I think it naturally draws people with that kind of outlook in, but by the same token, it's sort of this vehicle to allow you to explore it if you want to. Or, I mean, there's plenty of people who don't have that sensibility, that are just looking at it as a financial asset. They don't think of doing self custody. They're not looking for a way to fight the man, so to speak. They just want an asset that makes sense to them, that looks like a good investment. But for sure, you run into the spectrum of people who are very hardcore freedom lovers, who want nothing to do with the existing system. And it's really fun to be challenged by those ideas. Because we're a company that deals really closely with communities and politics and utilities and energy systems, we don't have the luxury of just kind of, throwing up the middle finger to the establishment. We're really working within the establishment to a certain degree and trying to help it and make life better for people who exist in the system as it is. So, it's kind of this paradox or this duality where you both love the tool for what it is and for what it can bring to people, and the ability to, say, resist autocracy or resist central control. But by the same token, it's a tool, so it can be used in whatever way you're able to imagine, and whatever way you're able to apply it to your circumstances.
Absolutely. That definitely makes sense. So, had you had mentors sort of along your journey and building your company up to what it is now? And who were they then, and who are your mentors now?
Early on, I would say my greatest mentors were books. We also live in the age of podcasts where you can really pick anybody as your mentor. And I know we share a coach in Dan Martell, so he's been quite influential recently. You can see his book behind me as well. And so recently he's been super helpful, but I've always had someone in my life, whether it be through podcasts, books, or physically, who I felt I could look up to and model. In my early real estate days, there's a guy named Scott who I still keep in touch with. He was a great coach early on for more than just doing real estate deals. And he really instilled in me the learn while you earn attitude, that you will, even if you end up paying someone quite a bit to coach along with you and do deals with you, you will make quite a bit more money just by shortcutting the mistakes that you would make not working with someone who's already been there before you and seen, 1,000 times more failures than you have so far in your life. So I'm a huge believer in using other people's experience to shortcut what you don't yet know that you don't know. And in mining, happy to say, but it's also a little bit more challenging. there aren't as many people who have necessarily done this for decades and decades. It's too new of an industry. So there's a few people who I consistently work with. I consider them more peers at this point because we're all kind of at the tip of the spear. This is much more of a pioneering space to me than say going out and doing real estate deals, which is a little bit more a tried and true model. But wherever you can find people that you respect, and I think it's part of why I was drawn to Dan as well, and maybe you, is they don't necessarily need to be within your industry to have something that you can learn from. It can often just be an attitude, a way of looking at life, a way of thinking about your time and your energy that is the key piece of information or the key way of looking at the world that's going to change how you interact with everything in your life.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree 100%. It's key to pay to avoid those shortcuts. There isn't enough time to make all the mistakes on your own, let alone don't have enough money to make all those mistakes on your own. Did you have entrepreneurial parents? Like what got you started just down the entrepreneurial journey in general?
Yeah, so I was very lucky that my parents were both entrepreneurial. They, up until my father passed in 2016, he and my mother worked on their court reporting business together. So he was the CEO and she was the president, or maybe it was the other way around. But they were, joined at the hip every day at work, and they built a company to 100 plus employees, one of the largest in the southeast of their business line. Growing up, I thought it was the most boring thing in the world what they chose to do, and had no interest in, say, continuing the family legacy. But it was definitely something that I took for granted, and I'm really grateful now in hindsight that they had the entrepreneurial spirit, because just like how you model your parents and their romantic relationships unconsciously, you model your parents' behaviors towards risk, toward believing in yourself, toward how you interact with the world. And so it was this unappreciated gift that they were willing to go out and take the risk to build something in their own. And I just thought that was natural. So as long as I've thought about what I would do with my life, it's always been in the context of, well, of course I'll own a business and I'll build my own business. So in that sense, I was very lucky. I think even if they weren't entrepreneurial, that I was too much of a rebellious spirit as a kid to not go out and do that. I don't think I would have been a great fit for a corporate job, and that was honestly one of my greatest fears growing up, was that I would go find something that paid me just enough to stay involved with it, but never build anything for myself, and always be at the mercy of somebody else's decision making. So super, super happy that they were part of the influence that made me feel comfortable going off and taking the risk of being an entrepreneur. Because it's totally worth it. If you can build the freedom into your life, there's nothing more worth it than going out and building something for yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it sounds like sort of maybe when you're younger, taking that for granted. Oh yeah, this is just what they do, and then later on, sort of that did have an influence and impact on you during those years to say, oh yeah, I can do this. I want to be an entrepreneur, and then taking going down that road. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's awesome, and that's nice that you went down that road. You know, I think similar to you, had that rebellious attitude, and but not enough to avoid the job. So I ended up, in the fire department, working for the government, and then it quickly realized I'm not built to work for the government, for this big, very rigid structure. So it took me a little bit to realize, yeah, I'm better off running a business. So I'm really interested to hear, you're at the tip of the spear. Really, it's this brand new industry. What are the challenges that you face with setting up this Bitcoin mining company?
There's probably two main groups of challenges, and I'll separate them into just the learning curve, and then the other main challenge would be the learning curve for people outside of the industry. So on the inside, the learning curve is just, we in Bitcoin mining, we intersect so many different complicated industries that are well entrenched, energy being a great example of something that's privatized, and you can still make money with an energy company, but is highly, highly regulated. So it's not something with a very low barrier to entry to get into the energy space. Combine that with things like money and computing, and you've got, three of the most misunderstood industries in the world. that most people walking around, even though they interact with them every day, have no idea how they work. So the learning curve of being able to navigate those things was pretty steep for me initially. I'm really grateful that I had enough of an engineering background, enough of a real estate background, and some family history in unpacking what money is. Thankfully, my grandfather was quite the gold bug and taught us all from a young age, what sound money is. So I had at least a fundamental understanding of some of these concepts that allowed me to, pick up a few books and really get very far down. There were still plenty of engineering challenges. It's not easy to build a data center, but happy to say that really at this point, the biggest challenge, and this is also clearing up, is the challenge of educating people outside of our space what this is. So most people, when they hear of Bitcoin mining, if they've heard anything and they know anything, they've probably heard that it's boiling the oceans, that it's bad for the environment, it wastes a bunch of energy. And I probably don't have to tell you that those are falsehoods at this point. It's been very well documented that it's just not a true narrative. But most people still don't get that. Most people don't understand how this industry functions. They don't understand the way that it interacts with our energy systems. And that leads to conversations where we have to do a lot of ground level education. And especially because we're going into these smaller rural communities to build data centers, because I think that's where we can have the most impact. We're having to take people who often have no understanding of how money works, how energy works, how data centers work, and really building up their understanding from the ground up to help them understand how this industry can help their community. And so it's not necessarily, met with a lot of resistance. It's not necessarily hard. It just takes a long time. So we have to be really intentional about using our time and investing in those communities that are able to see what value we bring. So yeah, like anything, and this is part of why we do content like this, right? Where we get on podcasts, we do educational videos, is there's so much work to do to educate people, not just about our space, but about any space and any business, that whatever you can do to multiply that effort, I think is a great investment of time. So education, getting people on board, getting them to understand what the positive impacts are to embracing industries like this is a huge part of our work nowadays.
Yeah, I can see how education is so important, especially like you said, you're interacting with people on a lot of different fronts through the company, and if they don't have a clear understanding of how it works, then that makes things more difficult. Have you found, lately in recent years, is there better understanding in general? Like, where would you say we are sort of on that adoption curve right now?
I'd say we're still definitely in the early adopter phase of this technology being embraced by the world. Just in terms of assets, we're still at less than 1% of global assets for Bitcoin generally. Bitcoin mining is still using, less than 1% of the world's energy. And in my view, I think that this is going to be the future of the world's money. So we should at some point go to 5%, 10%, maybe up to 20 or 30%, depending on what kind of asset you see this as. And kind of the same on the energy side. This is one of the most potent energy management tools that we have available in the world. And the fact that it's less than a percentage point of the energy that we use is just a sign to me that there's so much room to run. So I think we've still got a very far stretch to go just for this to be even moderately accepted by the mainstream. That said, the approval of the Bitcoin ETFs earlier this year, the incoming Trump administration, the difference in tax treatment, just the winds of change are clearly blowing in favor of this. And I think that maybe this cycle, the most dangerous words in any investment, the most dangerous words in any investment are "this time is different," but this time really does feel different for a lot of reasons. So I'm really excited to see what the next 4 years have in store for this industry. I think that in some ways the "and then we fight you" stage is coming to an end, or at the very least we're probably over the worst of it. Famous last words maybe, but definitely when number goes up and when there's more political acceptance, this is an easier space to be in, and I think more people are ready to embrace it. I'm sure you experienced this. We just had Thanksgiving recently. I guess it was a month prior for you guys in Canada. But it's much easier to have these conversations with friends and family when you're sitting close to $100,000 Bitcoin than when you're at
Mhm.
$15,000 Bitcoin and FTX just blew up.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, definitely. And so you talked initially about, and you can help me to understand your facilities. You're also helping balance the grid. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of different ways that mining companies will interact with energy. You can choose to go build your own energy resources. You may use methane from landfills. There's flare gas. There's all these different ways that you can set up mining facilities. We've chosen to locate on grid, so we're connected to the same grid tie that your homes and businesses and other industrial facilities are. And the reason that we've done that is we actually believe that mining is the best energy balance at the lowest cost. The reason for that is mining acts like essentially a battery. So it's constantly taking energy and taking a lot of energy, but you have the ability to interrupt it at any time, turn the mining facility all the way off, and essentially give that capacity back to the grid. So the way that works in reality is there's essentially two times of the year where energy gets 10, 100, even 1,000 times more expensive than your regular daily energy rate. And those few times a year, it's less than 1% of the year in most grids, contributes to 10 to 15% of the annual costs. So what we're doing is that 1% of the year that we can turn off and give that capacity back, we're helping these cities and these communities avoid 10 to 15% of the costs that they would incur that year, which allows them to charge less for the energy that they give to their consumers. So whenever we locate in an area where we're large enough to have that kind of impact on the local community's grid, we actually can lower the cost for all the consumers there. And that to us is the most compelling reason that we should set up mining, not just as a huge facility somewhere in the middle of nowhere, but in as many small communities as we can possibly locate in where we can have this outsized impact. So that's been our core mission as well as our core benefit to the places we locate is that if we do our job right, if we set up at the appropriate scale, we should be able to lower costs for everybody that lives in that community and actually pave the way for other businesses to exist. So in Oregon, for example, lumber, paper, some of these high energy use businesses that really made the region have left in the last 10 to 20 years. And in the wake of that, you have job loss, you have tax revenue loss, you have all of these different things that make a community less prosperous. And a lot of it is because the input costs go up and there's places that are cheaper, whether it's China, overseas, or just another part of the US where they have lower input costs and they're more competitive. So if we can effectively do this for our communities and lower the cost of energy, which is the main input to all businesses, we can actually encourage businesses to come back, grow that tax revenue again, and actually bring some prosperity back to the communities. So we consider ourselves kind of the anchor or at least a puzzle piece to reinvigorating these communities and bringing new life to these places that don't necessarily have as much opportunity as some of the main urban centers in our world.
I see that makes a lot of sense. So you're bringing energy costs down basically wherever you're setting up. And you mentioned briefly sort of the international market. Do you feel like you're in a competition to find lower cost energy since that's one of the few variables in the mining equation?
Absolutely. Energy is our main input cost. It's often somewhere between 60 and 80% of our total bill to run the company is just what we spend on energy. So everywhere that we can optimize that procurement cost, we're doing ourselves a huge favor in terms of being more profitable and staying viable further into the future. And the US is this unique set of circumstances where it doesn't have the cheapest energy in the world, but most of the places that do have the cheapest energy in the world have all these other risks that come with operating. So there's a ton of companies that'll set up in say Kazakhstan or Paraguay or even Venezuela, these places where energy is extremely cheap due to some kind of natural resource. And the issue that people have is even if your energy is really cheap, if you say have your equipment stolen or seized within the first couple of years of operating, doesn't matter how cheap your energy cost is, you no longer have a business. So the US is unique in the sense that it's a much safer place to operate. It's much more politically stable. And even though it doesn't have the cheapest energy in the world, we do have a ton of natural resources. And I would say that we have the ability to have the cheapest energy in the world. So, part of the value add that we bring is that miners, more so than almost any industry in the world, have the eye to look for not only finding the cheapest energy, but making the cheapest energy, because it's very much to our benefit to do so. So, in a way, the more miners that you have in your country, the more you're going to encourage energy innovation. And we love to be at the point of the spear on that. Right now, we're focusing on the grid and what we can do very easily with grid balancing, but integrating things like using waste gas, landfill gas, flare gas, bringing more nuclear onto the grid, developing new energy sources. All of these things benefit not only us as a business, but they benefit the communities that we live in. So it's very much in our interest to be at the tip of the spear as energy innovators as well.
Yeah, and I see that as very exciting to be, part of that forefront of innovations in energy. And you mentioned nuclear, so I just had this thought. So right now, the U.S. money supply, you can say that it's based, in part on U.S. military might and its nuclear carriers. So do you see sort of that basis of money going from, the nuclear arsenal and the nuclear carriers to, nuclear energy sources that are powering Bitcoin mining? Yeah, what are your thoughts just on the future of that technology innovation? What do you see as, what's coming up on the horizon?
Yeah, so you bring up a great point, and actually, there's a book behind me that if anybody wants to find it, there's a free PDF online, and it's called Soft War, and it's based on a PhD thesis by Jason Lowry. And the premise of the book essentially is that money is a power projection game, that there's always some form of energy going behind the economic value that we trade in the world. You mentioned that the dollar is essentially secured by a military, and that at some point we might secure it by pure energy. And that's kind of the bridge that Bitcoin builds to the future, which is securing our future monetary resources 100% backed by energy. And this is not some new idea. He talks about it in the book, but people like Nikola Tesla, Henry Ford, they had these ideas. They described them as energy battles that would stop wars and energy-backed currencies. And at the time, they just didn't really have the tools to build this out. There wasn't a such thing as a decentralized peer-to-peer ledger that ran on the internet. There was no internet. So they were really, you know, years and years ahead of their time to be able to see what kind of incentive system would build the best money. But you can go even further back in history and talk about things like gold, where one of the reasons that it made good money for people was that it took energy to create it, it took energy to refine it, and it took energy to go and find more of it. So it was this really hard thing to fake, and thus it made it a really good trading vehicle, a really good tool for economic use. And so, projecting out into the future, the more that we can tie our money and our economic resources directly to energy, which is this foundational resource that runs our world, the more perfect of a system that we have, the closer we are to this perfectly ordered dynamic feedback loop that's really as close as you can get tied to reality. And in my opinion, Bitcoin is this thing that at least so far has perfected that. And we're still so early on that trend. But to answer your question in short, yeah, I do believe that energy, although we've gone years now with just having essentially paper currency that's backed by whoever has the biggest stick or the most powerful military, I think that our future looks much more like an energy trading game, or not a hot war, but a soft war, where people are literally just fighting each other with essentially peaceful energy battles, where they're projecting power and using that to secure this monetary system that nobody controls but everybody participates in.
Awesome. Yeah, I like that perspective, and yeah, that's a bright future to look forward to. Okay, I have one devil's advocate question. So this is what my dad brings up when I talk to him about Bitcoin. He's a software developer for a robotics company, and he says, "Oh yeah, this is all nice, but advances in quantum technology are gonna break the encryption in Bitcoin soon enough." What? Yeah. What's your opinion on that? If you've heard that question before.
I have heard that question before, and it's very central to us as miners, right? Because if that happens, that means that the miners are the ones who are left holding the bag the most. There's a few different ways you can take this, but the most important one I think is that Bitcoin is a protocol that adapts. So in previous years, we've had upgrades to the network, we've had different functionalities added to the network, and one of those potential upgrades to the network is quantum resistance. Right now it runs on the SHA-256 algorithm, but there's nothing that says that you couldn't sub out a quantum resistant algorithm as soon as it becomes relevant to prevent that kind of attack. So as much as I would hate to not be able to use the miners that we're currently using in our facilities, I do think that future, if it is a future, is quite far off, and that it's, at least a decade into the future. Now, people said that about AI, and we're already seeing some impressive things happen with AI. So I don't want to be one of those people that says the internet is like the fax machine and it won't be relevant. But, all that to say, I do think that it's something that we should be aware of, but it's something that's far out into the future, and that there's a well-identified path for how we would go against it. The other thing that I would say about that is Bitcoin is this great system of incentives. So just by the way that it's designed, it influences people to act in a certain way. And if I personally had a quantum computer that could break the encryption algorithm, a much more lucrative use of that quantum computer would not be to go and attack the network, but would actually be to go and mine on the network and be more efficient. So if, for example, quantum computer could find the nonce, that, one number that mines a block more quickly than a traditional SHA-256 miner, it's much more lucrative to go out and be the best person at finding blocks and stack Bitcoin than it is to attack the network. There's not really any economic benefit in spending the energy and the computing power to just destroy it. So, you're protected in two ways. One, the technology is anti-fragile, it adapts. And then two, it's built in this way that it's much more lucrative to participate than it is to come and crash everybody's party.
That's a great answer. So it's, there's the multi-phase, sort of the adaptability, everything you mentioned, that comes together to make it resistant to that challenge. So that's a great answer. I'll pass that on to my dad for sure. And then, yeah, right now in the business in mining, what would you say is the biggest challenge that you're facing?
I'd say the biggest challenge is what we mentioned earlier, is that most people don't understand it still. And again, that's rapidly changing, but with any new industry, I mean, people were scared of email for whatever reason. They were scared of internet businesses when they first came around.
I mean, people are scared of AI right now. They're scared. I'm like, what? Why? Why are you scared? But yeah.
Anything that people don't understand, they will resist. And it's the old adage that the confused mind says no. If people don't understand what you're doing, even if it seems like it might be good for them, it might be good for the community, it might be good for the world, if they don't get it, they're more likely to try to fight whatever you're trying to do, even if they see some benefit to it. And one example would be like the battle between renewable energy and more traditional fossil fuel energy sources. There's inherently a conflict that arises when someone disrupts your business model. And so even though they're both energy companies, they're both energy resources, they are frequently found to be at odds with each other and trying to take each other down. The same thing would be said about nuclear. Nuclear, even though it's clean, efficient, safer than even solar by statistics, is something that's been repeatedly just stamped out of existence and kept from proliferating because there's these entrenched interests that keep it from getting larger and becoming more of an energy resource. So the same thing is likely to happen and has been happening in Bitcoin mining, is that if someone sees you as a threat to their entrenched business model, they're more likely to resist you. I'm happy to say that I think we're past the greatest resistance in this case. Mm-hmm. Most of it was in the early years, and most of it was bad science that was debunked. But, definitely the greatest danger to anything that's new, interesting, and pioneering are the Luddites, or the people who have entrenched interests who really don't want to see you succeed because it's some kind of threat to the way that they've built their wealth or built the world that they live in.
Yeah, definitely. That education piece is so important. And so can you speak to someone, who has limited understanding in Bitcoin? They might have, they might have purchased some on some platform. Maybe they just downloaded an app and said, "Oh, I have some Bitcoin now." But if somebody is trying to develop a strategy of, an adoption strategy, maybe if they own a business or personally, if they have some money to invest, what are some tips for them getting started that would help them out?
So the first and most important thing is you're going to hear a lot more about crypto. I'm going to put crypto in air quotes because as soon as Bitcoin starts to do well, most of these other altcoins also tend to do well. I spent years looking at things other than Bitcoin, and I can wholeheartedly say that one of the best decisions of my life was to go 100% Bitcoin only. There's just too much to learn, and you can't possibly learn it all to keep up with some of these new projects. And many of them are designed and built in ways that just enrich their founders or VC funds at the expense of the people who get in at the regular time in the market when it becomes publicly available. So the first thing I would say is Bitcoin is truly an innovation. It is absolutely world-changing technology, and you are not late to it. And you should not go into the crypto sphere more broadly to try and get a higher multiple on your money. I would equate the crypto world to speculation and gambling, and I would equate Bitcoin to more like money saved in your mattress or gold buried in your backyard. This is a long-term savings account. It's a way for you to store energy far into the future. It is not a quick 10, 100, or 1000x that you can, put $1,000 in and expect $1 million tomorrow. So the mindset is the number one most important thing that either makes keeps people poor. Second is the most dangerous allocation is zero. So even if you don't have the same degree of belief that I have, where I'm 100% allocated to this space through my business and through just personal holdings, the most dangerous opinion that you can have is that this isn't going to be a thing and that you're going to ignore it. So at minimum, 1 to 5% is just the standard way to diversify into something that you want to watch and keep an eye on, but you're not taking outsized risk. And historically, that's been a great way to just balance a portfolio. Even if you don't have a strong Bitcoin thesis, a couple percentage points so that you're exposed to it is just a great mix. And then the last thing I'll say is as you learn more, as you invest more, as your conviction builds, to me, this is the most important intersection of technologies and industries that we have going on today, between being built on the base layer of computing and that essentially running our world, interacting with energy, and reinventing the monetary system. This is poised to be one of the most important changes that we've ever seen in technology and in money and essentially in the way the world works. So just like if you ignored the internet in 1999 and then went to sleep for 25 years and woke up today, you would be quite confused and upset that you didn't take advantage of it. This is going to be one of those things where if it goes the way that I believe it is and that most people involved in the space believe it is, it could be the most expensive mistake of your life to not understand how it works. Even if you choose not to be, 100% allocated maxi like I am, if you ignore it, it's probably at your own peril. And that's been the case with any transformative technology, is that it completely rewrote the way that we interacted with the world. A great example of this would be, Kodak, the huge camera company that now I don't think most people walking around today have any exposure to, invented the digital camera and then kept it under wraps because they didn't want to disrupt their business model. Well, that didn't work out well for them because once you are exposed to new technology, once it's released into the world, it's going to proliferate if it's better. And if you don't adopt it, you will be left behind and essentially relegated to irrelevancy. So we now have better monetary technology. We have better energy technology that's available to us. If you ignore it, you're doing so at the peril of being just like the standard classic film camera. So I would say the worst thing you could do, even if you're not fully convinced about it, is totally ignore it. I would build some understanding and go in with an open mind. And at the very least, you'll understand the world better.
That's a great analogy. I like the Kodak analogy. Yeah, the biggest mistake is having zero allocation and just ignoring the new technology that's, and right now it's quite obvious and it's quickly gaining market share. So for someone who needs to learn more, should they go out and be reading Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper, or maybe what's a resource that people can look into?
Yeah, so I mean, the white paper is ground truth. That was the Bitcoin thesis and the design straight from the creator itself. So I would start there. It's only 8 pages or 9 pages, so it's quite a short document. There's so much education on YouTube now. I mean, I couldn't even tell you how many hours I have gotten of free YouTube education that have absolutely changed my life. So the Sailor series, if you need to really invest, 20 to 25 hours listening to one of the most brilliant engineers and billionaires of our time talk about this stuff. It's from a few years ago, so it's still a little bit dated, but the fundamentals of how he speaks about the technology and its context and history. If you're looking for, I've only got 20 to 30 hours to invest in this and I really want to understand it top to bottom, that is one of the best resources that I could ever recommend. Yeah, we have such a gift of being able to access all of the world's information in real time nowadays. If you have a specific question, I would put it into GPT and ask for resources about it. Use the tools that we have today to find information. Obviously, my company, Abundant Minds, we have a YouTube channel. We do quite a bit of education. I think that is one of the most important things that we can provide to our clients is not just setting them up with passive income and a sound investment strategy, but also having them educated. The people who are educated and build conviction, understand what they hold, are the least likely to make emotional mistakes. So we believe a lot in educating people that work with us. So feel free to check out our YouTube channel. That's at Abundant Minds. Same handle for YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, essentially all platforms you can find us. And we also, since you bring it up, we're coming up at the end of the year now, so people are thinking about taxes. Mining is one of these really interesting tax strategies that shares some characteristics with real estate, heavy equipment, some of these other things that people have used historically to get into a lucrative business, but also offset their taxes. So if your audience has any interest in say, getting into the space and they want to do it into a tax advantaged way, if you message us on either X or Instagram offset, we will send you a free tax plan that shows how mining can impact your tax bill. But, for just general education, I'd say the world is your oyster, man. I've gotten so much free value from YouTube. And of course, if you reach out to my team, we're always happy to do one-on-one consults and make sure that you enter this space well equipped and that you've got expert opinions. Obviously we have the ability to help people and get them into the industry in a direct way. But we pride ourselves on not just being salespeople, but being educators and making sure that everybody leaves knowing more, understanding more, and feeling more confident than they did before they met us.
That's great, and we'll put those links in the show notes for sure. I have one more, deep dive question. So Bitcoin, the hardcore Bitcoiners, they've just, maybe even self-described it, as like a cult or a religion. But my question is, in your life, does spirituality or religion play a role in your life, and to what extent does it influence your business?
That is a great question. And so I was raised Christian. I went to church quite a bit as a young kid, and as I grew up and went to college and actually found my wife, I got way more into the meditation space. So through different periods of my life have been more religious or more just generally spiritual. I find that integrating your life and work with some sense of spirituality and purpose is one of the most important things that you can do. And I don't steer people toward any particular, belief system or way of looking at the world other than the unexamined life and the faithless life is quite empty. So, some of the most impactful things for me have been getting into meditation and getting closer with just the nature of how the mind works and how we all connect as beings. So I do think we're all connected. I do think that it's really important to integrate not just your personal life, but also your work life with some sense of higher purpose and higher connection. So, and you mentioned that Bitcoin is often referred to as like a cult or kind of a religious phenomenon in some sense. And I think a lot of that comes from just a recognition in the community that you're dealing with some of the most important interconnecting fabrics of how society works. And it's hard to not get passionate about something like that. It's hard to not tie yourself into something like a belief system when you're dealing with something so fundamental to how we interact with each other. And, most people in their lives find the greatest sense of purpose in their work. So it would be kind of like shooting yourself in the foot to not integrate some sense of purpose and spirituality into your work in that way. And not that everybody who gets into Bitcoin or builds a business needs to somehow directly connect it, but every time you wake up and share your energy with the world, that is a spiritual exchange. And I think that being true to that and honoring that not only is going to be better for you, but it's going to be better for everybody that you interact with. You're much more likely to leave a significant impact on people if you're connected to as close as you can get to ground truth and ground truth of reality. So, super important for people to find that connection, whatever it may be for them.
Absolutely, 100% agree. Okay, I've got some rapid fire questions for you. Just yeah, some quick answers.
Let's do it.
So if you were gonna write a book, what would it be about?
Oh man, I'm in the middle of writing my book. I'm still working on the title. The working title is Energy Money, and the basic case for the book is what I said earlier. If you don't understand the intersection of reinventing money, energy systems being redesigned, and the foundation of our world being run on computing, you're going to wake up 10 years from now very confused. So I'm writing this for someone who, looks like me 10 years ago. They're smart, they want to know how to navigate the world, but they don't necessarily know what they don't know. And so I really want it to be a blueprint for people to be able to navigate how the world is going to look and be able to take advantage of that. So I've always been entrepreneurial. I've always wanted to leave an impact and get rewarded for that impact. And I think the book should be a blueprint for people to go and replicate that if they study and they understand and they make use of understanding the world around them. That should flow back to them in terms of value.
Amazing. I think that's the best answer I've had to that question. You're already working on it. Awesome. So I'll look forward to that when that comes out. If you were going to give a top book recommendation, what would that be?
It's so cliche, but I put up the books that have a lot of impact on me on my bookshelves. And recently, Buy Back Your Time has absolutely changed my life. And it's how we met is the author, Dan Martell. So, for anybody who's an entrepreneur, business owner, or really is just looking to rebalance their life and have more impact, that has been one of the most profound books in so many ways for me to pick up. And it just came into my life in the last year. Another one that's just off screen that you probably can't see is Rick Rubin's book, The Creative Act. That has been extremely impactful to me. I'm a drummer and have always been a musician, so I love creating. And Rick Rubin just has the coolest way of approaching creativity. And you don't necessarily have to be an artist. This can be applied to your business. It can be applied to your personal life. It's really just a way of interacting with the world. And to your question earlier about spirituality, life is your artwork that you leave behind. The way that you show up in your life and the way that you interact with people is the canvas that you get to paint on and people get to remember you for. So to the degree that you can do that and make it a masterpiece, it leaves everybody better off.
Amazing. Definitely. I'm going to check that out, Rick Rubin, Creative Act, and we'll put that in the show notes as well. If you could have dinner with anyone dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Oof, man, that's a fantastic question. This is a cheat answer, and I have to stress this before I answer the question. I don't think that it's important that we know who Satoshi Nakamoto is. But if I could have dinner with Satoshi Nakamoto and figure out what it was he or she saw as they created Bitcoin, I would just be so curious to peer into the mind behind that invention. And again, I don't think it's important that we know who it is. I would be fine having dinner, behind a black screen or something so that the identity wasn't revealed. But just getting to peer into the mind of someone who saw such a disjointed reality and came up with this sort of bridge technology to help us get to the next stage of human evolution, I would love to know how their mind works and be able to ask them some questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, that'd be a great conversation. If you could wave a wand and be free of any one habit, what would that be?
I think I would probably wave the wand of being free of doubting myself. Engineers and people who think a lot are often guilty of paralysis by analysis, and it leads us not to act on things even when we know they're true. So if I could, go back to myself 10 years ago and just imbue a little bit of confidence and remove some of that self-doubt, give myself a little bit more bias toward action, I think I would be quite a bit further along. Now, that said, we all go on the journey that we go on for a very specific purpose, and I wouldn't change anything about my past or the way that I got here. Even the mistakes, the money lost, the ways that I've shown up that I wasn't proud of, every one of them shows up in a way that teaches you something about yourself and about the way that you should be navigating the world and you should be going through your life, that I think is invaluable. So I wouldn't seek to change myself in the past, but I would definitely want to, give myself a heftier dose of self-confidence, because usually it's the greatest mistake that we make, not acting on the things that we believe and the things that we know to be true.
I love it. And what's your favorite app or most used app on your phone?
Unfortunately, it's probably the mail app, and I'm getting better at that. But yeah, I'm trying to think of
Yep.
something a little bit more useful for your audience. But yeah, unfortunately, it's probably
Yeah, no,
email.
that's what it is for you. Yeah, I'm sure you're busy and that's what's necessary right now.
If
So
Dan is listening to this, he's gonna absolutely, smack me next time he sees me for saying that.
yeah, you can work on buying that back. And then how do you unwind after a long day?
After a long day, I always unwind watching TV with my wife and our dogs curled up in a blanket. And our favorite shows are Survivor, and we love watching documentaries as well. So I'm usually the kind of person who unwinds even by just getting taught something. So after she's fallen asleep from watching Survivor, I'll usually have a documentary up. We've also loved all of the treasure hunting shows through the years, one of our favorites being the long-running Oak Island series. So if you're looking for a very long, drawn-out treasure hunt series, Oak Island is a great way to fall asleep at night, but super intriguing, and love going through the mystery and the process of discovery with those guys.
Awesome. That's great. Anything else you wanted to cover? That's it for my rapid fire questions.
I mean, honestly, Nick, I'd love to ask you a question, which is, most of us will not do a podcast or show ourselves to the world without some kind of really intense purpose or some reason to put ourselves out there. So I'd love to know what your mission for starting this was, how it evolved, and what kind of impact you'd like to leave on the world with this, because I think you're doing something very right by sharing yourself with the world. And I'd just love to know, one, what you want that to look like, and two, how I could help you.
That's a great question. And the podcast has evolved because I started it a year ago. The intention a year ago was to bridge the gap in communications between contractors and customers. That was the issue I was seeing in front of me in the work that we do. There's, you hear horror stories of contractors running away with people's money way more than you should. But then once I started talking to people and I realized, wow, there's so many business owners and just entrepreneurs out there who have these valuable lessons to teach. And like you said, even from unrelated industries, you have all these transferable lessons and skills. And I said, I love having these conversations because there's so much that I can learn from everyone, even just personally. So I expanded it to all entrepreneurs. And I mentioned this a bit in the introduction. The intention is for somebody who's in my position 10 years ago, which was I wanted to start a business, but I was just completely lost. I had no guidance, no mentors. I didn't have the entrepreneurial parents to look to, and so it took me a while. So I had to fumble around in the dark for a while until I landed on this is something I can devote myself to. So for that person, so is why I do it. So I do it for myself 10 years ago, the young person who has the drive and wants to get into business so that they can learn from a wide range of business owners and entrepreneurs and realize, like you said, you don't start off with the confidence. You develop it over time and you make the mistakes and you grow your skills, and you just have to go out there and make it happen. So that's who I do it for. But great question.
Yeah, what do you think? What do you think the best thing that we can leave for your audience is? Do you think it's just a sense of confidence that you actually should go out and do it, or what do you think is the most valuable thing that people could get, not just out of this episode, but any of your show?
Yeah, I think you touched on it there is to take action, is not to get stuck in that doubt and that analysis by paralysis. I was in paralysis by analysis for years. So just to take the step and take action and move forward and write down your goals and take steps, actionable steps towards it every day, not just thinking about it and researching. Yeah, I'm very big on action. So that's what I would say. And what about you? Anything you would add to that?
No, I think you really encapsulated it well, which is we listen to podcasts, at least I do, to get information, but even more so to just feel the sense of experience that people bring and understand that people, when they share their stories, were in a place that was very similar to where I was when I started out. And there's far more similarities between you and someone like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or these people who've made huge world changing moves than there are differences. And for anybody that feels called to do something like that, you are absolutely doing the right thing by listening to that calling. And you shouldn't rule yourself out because of some part of your background or some skill that you don't have yet. Most of the skills that have been relevant to me being successful in the last few years, I have acquired in the last few years. And it's definitely a just in time, not a just in case kind of learning, the way that Dan talks about, which is as you face problems, you don't need to necessarily prepare yourself for hypothetical situations and get everything in line before you take action. It's much more often that you take action down a path and then recruit the resources to you as you need them. So hopefully this is a resource for people, whether they're just getting into business generally, they're looking at getting into Bitcoin or getting into mining. Obviously, I and my team are here to help out with anything in the Bitcoin and mining space, but hopefully for you entrepreneurs that see a problem and see a need that you believe you can fill, you get out there and take action. It's so much more impressive when you take action and mess up than when you have everything calculated and you don't do anything.
Amazing. Great. Well, Beau, thanks for coming on. It was a great conversation. I think, yeah, a lot of listeners are going to find a lot of value in everything you have to say. So much appreciated.
Really appreciate you having me, Nick, and look forward to talking again and remaining friends.
Absolutely. All right. Take care.